name is Steve and I'm the Director of Sales for Sciphy Systems in Portland, Oregon. And this is a video of our presentation we delivered to the 2025 CANEXEC event to follow up on some of the questions that folks had. What we're going to do is run down through the same presentation, and then if you have any questions at the end, feel free to email me or Emmet at your convenience. And the agenda for this workshop is pretty simple. My goal is to start really at the 30,000 foot level and give everyone here a feel of where the global cannabis market is going. And at the end, Emmet's going to end up at ground level talking about specific products and specific SKUs that we think are going to be the products of the future. But before we get started, I'd like to get started with a simple test to see where everyone's basic knowledge is. And I'll warn you before I give you this test that I asked these 5 questions of myself, and I only got one of them right. So with that being said, we're going to launch into the questions. And keep in mind, no Googling allowed. I want you to get a spare piece of paper and just jot down your answers. Question number 1. What country was the first to federally legalize recreational cannabis? What country legalized cannabis recreationally first? Okay, scratch your answer down. We'll move on to number 2. What country exported the most medical cannabis globally in the last decade? Question number 3. What country consumes the most cannabis in the world? What country actually uses the most? That one really surprised me. Question number 4. What country produces the most cannabis globally? And finally, what is the leading cannabis product on store shelves right now? And that, by the way, is in every cannabis market in the world. It's the same general product. So let's run back up and take a look at question number 1. What country was the first to federally legalize recreational cannabis? I thought it was Canada. I was wrong. It was Uruguay in South America. What countries exported the most medical cannabis globally? As a dual U.S. British citizen, I was shocked I didn't know the answer to this one. It's the United Kingdom. Now, Canada has since taken over the last year, but over the last decade, the United Kingdom. In terms of the country that consumes the most cannabis in the world, I should back up to actually the second one and the third one and the fourth question. In all 3 countries, the product is still illegal, and the answer to question number 3 is India. Question number 4, what country produces the most cannabis globally right now? I thought Canada, then I thought the United States. I was wrong on both counts. It's Morocco. And finally, what is the leading product on the shelf right now? And ubiquitously, that is flower. But we feel that all of these questions, or at least the answers to these questions, are going to change over the next decade, and that's what we're going to talk about today. So questions like these appear to be so simple, especially when you're an expert in the field. I've been in this industry over 14 years, and I was shocked I didn't know the answers to these questions, but I do know that the questions get harder as we go further into this industry. And part of what we want to talk about today is what is causing some of the changes in the industry. And I'm going to ask an important question at the end that, frankly, I don't have an answer for. But before we get into that question, I will say that the data that we're going to be providing you today is going to be both broad and narrow. And our job is to give some ideas on how you can interpret some of that data. Ultimately, you're going to make your own decision as how to interpret it. But we want to give you some facts that you might not have considered. And with that, I'd like to move on to this chart below that talks about the recreational drugs consumed in the United States, Canada, and the EU. And really, we have 2 charts here. The first is the current consumption rates in 2024, and the lower chart shows the consumption rates in and around 2014. Take a minute to look at that chart. As you see the red numbers, those are numbers that have changed more than 5% over the last 10 years. A couple things to talk about in terms of population. And the first being that the EU, even after Brexit, has more people than both the United States and Canada combined. The second is that if you look over the last 10 years, the biggest increases in cannabis consumption occurred during legalization. And we can surmise that consumption rates of cannabis could double and in some cases even triple once a medical market turns to a recreational adult use market. The other thing that's interesting is that the EU currently has the highest rates of alcohol consumption and the highest rates of tobacco consumption. What's interesting is the EU is the only region that is actually increasing their rates of tobacco consumption, whereas in the US and in Canada, most of those rates are going down. But look at how low those rates of cannabis consumption are in the EU. Now, one of the things that's not stated in this chart is that much like in the United States, where we have different states, some have legalized and some haven't, the same is happening in the European Union. Some of the countries have created medical programs. Most of them have a medical program at this point. Some of them are considering offering some type of recreational program. But the other point I want to make is that with these new markets, if you look at the next graph, it talks about the change of products purchased from 2008 through 2014. This chart is specifically the Canadian market. There are a couple points that really stick out, and I'll let you take a look at that chart for a minute. You know, obviously the first salient point is that flower is down, although you'll see in a chart later that there's a subset of flower, which is pre-rolls, and that is up significantly. But overall flower is down. And in fact, if you look at it, all smokable products are down. The hashes, the rosins, even the extracts are down over the last 6 years in Canada. And what's come up significantly are vape carts, beverages, and edibles, although beverages still occupy a very small percentage of the overall market. And so the question that I often ask folks is, why is this happening? Why does this happen in every market? Why do extracts eventually take over flower in some markets? And I think the reason comes down to some product issues. When you smoke flower, you have over 400% more tar in it than tobacco does. It also contains a lot of carcinogens. Once you hit that burn point of 454 Fahrenheit, you generate over 20 carcinogens, starting with benzene. So smoking is very odoriferous. It stinks your breath up, it stinks your clothes up, your car and your house, and sometimes that can create problems. Vapes, on the other hand, use a much lower temperature. They avoid the tar, they avoid the carcinogens, and they produce much less smell. And of course, with edibles and beverages, there is no smell. So this is one of the biggest reasons I think that vapes and edibles are going to become some of the biggest products in the future. And that would include things like not only gummies, but pills. And in the medical market, we could be talking about things like transdermal patches, sublingual, in the mouth drops, that type of thing. And so before I get deeper into products, which Emmett's going to do a little bit later, I'd like to leave you all with a question to think about over the break. And that is, based on this data that you've seen, what do you think will be the biggest cannabis market globally in the next 10 years? And what do you think will be the next big product on the shelf? And on that note, I'm going to turn the next session over to Emmett.
Thank you, Steve. And now from usage trends, let's take a dive into the trends on SKUs and product market share. For this section, we've pulled data from our friends at Headset. The data comes from 4 provinces: Ontario, Alberta, BC, and Saskatchewan. So sorry for the Quebecois among us and others. And these graphs that I'm presenting have projections through 2025. Now, those 2025 projections are based on year-to-date data through September, and then simply doing a weighted projection out into the end of 2025. It doesn't take into account any sort of holiday trends or anything like that. Some of our friends at the event cast some question about the quality of Headset data and overall market data in Canada across the board. But I think there are some general trends that we can probably tease out from this data and give some credence. The first trend that I want to point to is that vape pens and vapable products overall are gaining year on year against the smokable products, that is pre-rolls and flower. Now, pre-rolls have seen a lot of gains over the past few years, and they continue to gain in total market share, but flower's market share has dropped overall more rapidly than pre-rolls have made up the difference. Another key thing is that pre-rolls category includes infused pre-rolls that are utilizing concentrates as a part of the formulation of those products. So overall, we're seeing a trend towards extracts, towards manufactured products, and away from simple smoked cultivated flower. On the side of edibles, and specifically in terms of beverages, we're seeing a continued gain for the edibles product category in total unit sales. However, we're seeing the total revenue from those products start to level off or even decrease year on year. In the beverage category, we've seen a more steady growth in terms of the sales and the percentage of total revenue of the market in sales, but the total unit sales have started to level out. Now, overall, I think we can say that these formulated products have continued to hold a real solid place in the market, and data that we have from Headset also supports the view that part of this overall gain in market share that isn't reflected on these charts is actually that the total number of equivalent serving units has gone up over time. Now, in most markets in Canada, you have a hard cap of 10 milligrams per unit sold. So it seems like the trend is towards maxing out that 10 milligram serving, but also we're seeing a trend towards product diversification and towards formulations that are including minor cannabinoids that continue to grow this category. And I'll speak in more specifics about why I think that is one overall trend to watch in the market. But overall, what we're seeing here is that edibles is a solid category to focus down for growth. And that said, it's become more and more cost competitive as the price per unit to manufacture has come down, and we've seen increases in automation and scale of manufacturing. Now, when we look at the overall picture for products across the board, what we see is a trend overall towards formulation and reconstitution. Now, what does that mean in simple terms? Basically, we're seeing more products where the flower has been taken into an extract and then broken up into multiple components, and then recombining and formulating those components into a standard product SKU that can be relied on for a consistent experience by the consumer. In particular, we've seen technology move forward so that the manufacturing of these different types of ingredients that are used all down the processing chain has become more cost effective and has become easier to actually generate these sort of fractions of the cannabis plant. In particular, we're seeing high terpene extracts coming from BHO and butane extraction, playing a greater role in the vape category, both in terms of sort of live resin extracts, but also just more broadly in terms of formulated cured resin type vapes as well as being formulated into distillate. Now, one key factor that I'd like to point out with regards to the vape category is that we're seeing Quebec move forward with allowing vapes in their market. However, they're limiting the concentration of THC, of total psychoactive cannabinoids in those vapes, down to 30%. Now, what that means is there's going to be a demand for minor cannabinoids to fill the gap. Predominantly, we'll likely see CBD, CBG also taking a role in that market to serve as a filler to keep the total THC concentration down. Now, as a part of that, it's very likely that those products are going to become more and more reliant on the isolates pipeline. In fact, this mirrors what we've seen in the United States, where distillate is largely being displaced by isolate THCA that's then being decarbed to go into vape products, and because it produces a very clean, very consistent, high potency oil base to then reformulate in the terpenes or other flavoring into. And when it's done with hydrocarbon extraction, it can be done at a much lower cost per unit manufacturing base. Another key thing to highlight here, of course, is that by doing that crystallization process, you leave your minor cannabinoids intact, and so create a larger feedstock base for separating those minor cannabinoids into purified compounds. So likely we'll see a greater availability of those minor compounds like THCV and others. Now, looking at the SKUs that we've picked as likely growth SKU categories that we think are going to gain in total market share, one of them is fast-acting edibles, so edibles that have some sort of bioavailability enhancement. And this is being driven by an overall desire for consumers not only to have fast onset, to be more equivalent to an experience like alcohol for use at public events or at home when there's a set timeline where they want to get straight into the experience, but also because of the faster overall decline in the peak effects, which means that the total experience is shorter, making it more manageable for scheduling those shorter events. And what we've seen in the hemp market, as we've seen a combined CBD and THC from hemp products in the United States, and with the perspective of those products coming with similar formulations into the cannabis market through the adult use path, what we've seen there is a real drive towards this fast-acting effect, and also towards balancing the THC with CBD. Now, this is a trend across all product categories, and we've taken a little qualitative look at why that is happening, why we're seeing vapes with higher CBD content in markets where that's not demanded by any sort of regulatory requirement, edibles as well, beverages in particular, but also even coming into the pre-rolls category where CBD containing smokables are gaining some market now. Overall, what we're seeing from people directly as consumers is that these products are more sessionable, they're more controllable, they have greater reliability and predictability in terms of their effect. Because the CBD is actually taking the edge off, it's reducing the risk of greening out or over consuming THC, and it also generally moderates the overall experience to make it more approachable, eliminates some of the couch lock, low energy effects, and allows for people to use cannabis products during the day without negatively impacting their overall productivity. So as consumers that consume a large proportion of the total market of cannabis are the ones that use daily and are using throughout the day, some of those consumers, a subset, are wanting a reduced impact experience for that middle of the day and morning experience, and then going into the evening, they may be switching into the more pure THC type products. This is a trend across all product categories, and honestly, it is what we think is the biggest driver alongside the enabling technology of a greater ingredient manufacturing capacity towards a true formulated, replicable experience, single SKU that users may go towards as a single point of preference, and moving away from the novelty type marketing and product release schedule that we've seen largely dominating the market up to this point. Edibles and beverages, of course, major drivers of this sort of trend, but as it becomes more and more feasible to do this for your vape products and even for your smokable products with infusion, we believe that this is going to really lead towards a market for formulated products with the same experience every time that a user or a consumer goes to that product with the same name. Now, moving to the next page, we can see a little bit more detail about what's actually enabling this market shift. As I mentioned, we're moving towards hydrocarbon extraction. We're talking to people across Canada who previously were dedicated only to ethanol extraction or even CO2 extraction, and many of them are now for the first time considering bringing on a hydrocarbon extraction setup. Hydrocarbon extraction has gained in terms of total market penetration because it is able to produce the most wide variety of ready-to-market SKUs as well as ingredients for the market. Dabbable oil, generally speaking, is only produced using hydrocarbon extraction, but that same advantage that allows for that dabbable product category to be manufactured also benefits downstream processing, such as manufacturing HTE, high terpene extract, and isolate in the same solvent that's used for extraction. Generally speaking, other solvents like ethanol require for the application of heat in a way that damages the terpene profile and largely makes it unusable as a flavorant for vaporable products. Butane, on the other hand, you can separate the HTE from a oil and then crash that oil into isolate crystals using either a crystallization reactor type approach or new technology like membranes that does that separation in the process solvent midstream in your extraction process. Overall, the efficiency of this stage both gains value from the HTE, which is a very, very valuable formulary ingredient, both for vape products as well as for other products like infused flower or infused pre-rolls, and isolate, which is largely displacing distillate as the preferred base for manufacturing vape oil, because decarboxylated isolate has a higher overall purity and also can be manufactured with a greater overall cost per unit manufactured advantage, both because you do not have to purchase the distillation equipment up front, but also because the actual cost of the process itself in terms of heat and material inputs is lower. So for those that are investing into hydrocarbon extraction capacity, this really opens up a broad market for the output ingredients that are manufactured. You have your packaged ingredients, and then you have your wholesale market, which is also wide open. As a secondary benefit of that isolate crashing process, you also have a mother liquor, which is rich in whatever minor cannabinoids might have been in that strain at the time of extraction. There's an increase in adoption of technologies that are either based on chromatography or are replacing chromatography, like liquid-liquid extraction, which can then separate those individual minor cannabinoids into formulary ingredients themselves. And as we've seen, those still hold a very high overall market value and are being used in an increasing number of products, including both edibles, but increasingly also vapeable products, as well as, of course, being used on the medical side in pharmaceutical formulary. So overall, we like to say that this is the era of hydrocarbon. It really is stepping into the fold as becoming a mainline extraction method and is no longer a specialty manufacturing approach. And so addressing this niche with scale in mind and the lowest cost of manufacturing is by far the greatest strategic move you can make in the current processing market. In fact, we've done studies on conventional BHO manufacturing. It is substantially less costly than the overall manufacturing chain for ethanol products towards the finished ingredients. But new technologies such as the membranes and such as heat integration that we have with our Synphase product line, including the HVH50 extractor, can reduce this cost by more than 50% again, and really make this overall easily the lowest cost per unit manufacturer for both oil products themselves as SKUs, and also for the ingredients that are used in edibles and other formulated products. So we hope that you'll consider hydrocarbon for your processing line, and also that you'll reach out to us at Sciphy Systems when the time comes to bring that process into your manufacturing facility. A few takeaways from this section. One, flavor is driving formulation, and increasingly that is also penetrating not only vape products, but also edible products and flower, including pre-rolls as well, by infusing HTE or other terpenes directly into the flower or other products. Potency and purity are really driving the adoption of new technologies, with isolate for use in vape carts being the #1 driver of this approach. And keep in mind that this is simply the nature of crystallization that's creating these higher purities, and it is at a very high efficiency of manufacturing. Formulate cannabinoids for sessionability. This trend is driven by a market that's increasingly familiar with combined THC and CBD products, and are showing a great acceptance and desire for these 1-to-1, 2-to-1 CBD to THC product categories. And we see also interest in other cannabinoids outside of CBD, including CBG, as a product that can really make an impact on the market for a set segment that is focused on daytime use and use alongside productivity. When you are looking at investing in distillate, consider hydrocarbon extraction as an alternative. That said, if you already have distillation equipment, keep an eye on overall market prices, as you may see that isolates are able to bring prices down below the overall distillation minimum price point. Now, the biggest trend that everyone is feeling across the market is the reduction in overall cost per unit at the retail and at wholesale. Generally speaking, this dictates the biggest trend that we see in the market, which is simply that profitability is dictated by your cost per unit manufactured. So when you go to bring in more processing capacity into your facilities or build a new processing facility from the ground up, stay focused on your cost per unit manufactured, and we can find a way to help you out with that, not only from an efficient manufacturing equipment standpoint, but also by capitalizing on energy efficiency credits from your power utility districts, which can cover a substantial percentage of the cost of new equipment. So here's over to Steve to discuss that in more detail.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, we'd like to close out today's session talking about some of the energy rebates that are available due to the efficiencies of new processing equipment. We're going to talk about 3 systems today, a little bit about how these rebates work and how you can get one. The first example you'll see on the handout is for a SpinTech centrifuge system. The SpinTech centrifuge does 4 or 5 different tasks, starting with things like mixing, homogenizing. You can spin terpenes out. You can also do solvent recovery down to non-detect levels. And in that step of solvent recovery, the SpinTech essentially replaces up to 2 vac ovens. So in this example, we use 2 across 7.5 cubic foot vac ovens for a comparison. The way these rebates work is that the power company gives incentives for customers to save energy. And what they do is they look at one system and then the new comparable system over a year, how much energy each one consumes, and the difference between the two will go into calculating the actual rebate amount. So to give SpinTech as an example, you can see here where the SpinTech is going to save 32,000 kilowatts a year. And this is an actual example from a real rebate application we did with the Energy Trust of Oregon. This example shows that at the 45 cents per hour that they reimburse, the client gets a rebate from the power company for almost $15,000. The important thing to understand is that you're not just saving $15,000 on the equipment. You're saving almost $4,000 a year in power costs. And that's on top of the savings you get on labor, space, the fact that you're making a better quality product. In addition, down below, you'll see examples of our HVH50 extractor and the X-Spiral membrane systems. Our extractor has a special syn-phase recovery system that actually doesn't use chillers or heaters in the traditional sense. And this system called syn-phase uses significantly less power, and in this case, about 25% less power than competing systems. So the rebate that we were able to get for that system was close to $200,000. And the important thing to understand is not just the $200,000 rebate, but this machine is saving over almost $55,000 a year in electricity. And again, that's beyond the labor savings and the fact that it makes a better quality product. But the king of the hill is our X-Spiral membrane system. Our calculations show that X-Spiral membranes, if they're used for solvent recovery, dewaxing, and decoloring, can save upwards of 95% of the energy normally used with these three functions. And so the rebates have been between 80 and 90% for this piece of equipment. Again, the important thing to understand is not just that 90% rebate. This piece of equipment that retails for about $70,000 is saving almost $45,000 a year in electricity every single year you use it. And so if anyone would like to get more information on the rebates in their area, or if you'd like my help applying for these rebates, you can contact me after the workshop and I'd be happy to help. And on that note, I'll thank you all for your time, and we look forward to hearing from you soon. Thank you.